Hello and welcome to this Health+Law webinar. My name's Dion Kagan. I'm a research associate at the Faculty of Law and Justice at the University of New South Wales and a research team member at the Health+Law Partnership. I'm beaming in today from the lands of the Wurundjeri and Woi Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I want to acknowledge their elders past and present. I'd also like to recognise the unique contribution of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and community-led organisations working to support and improve the lives of people living with HIV and viral hepatitis. Our work at Health+Law is focused on how people in those communities are affected by law and the legal environment, and how law has the potential to support more positive health outcomes for people affected by bloodborne viruses in Australia. Today, we're looking at the pivotal work of the HIV/AIDS Legal Centre, or HALC for short, in that intersection of health and law. HALC is a community legal centre that has been supporting people who face HIV and hepatitis-related legal matters since 1992. It also plays a broader role in the constellation of health and community organisations that serve and support people living with BBVs, and as we'll touch on in today's session, an advocacy and law reform role. And the departure point for our chat today is a recent impact evaluation that was conducted by HALC in collaboration with us at Health+Law and with the design and oversight of an independent team at a monitoring and evaluation consultancy, Cultivating Change. I'm here today with HALC's Principal Solicitor, Vikas Parwani, and Bethany Rogers, HALC's Strategic Policy Lawyer, who in a few minutes will tell us more about HALC's work and about the evaluation we conducted last year. But before that, we're going to hear briefly from my colleague and the research lead at Health+Law, David Carter. Hello, David.
Hi, Dion.
David is a CNTR Associate Professor at the Faculty of Law and Justice at UNSW. He's also a lawyer, a member of HALC's Committee of Management, and a passionate advocate for HALC's work. So David's been involved with the Centre for a long time, and I thought before we get deeper into the work that HALC does, and hear from Vikas and Beth and hear about this evaluation that was recently conducted, I was hoping you could just kick us off by saying a few things about HALC's core mission. It's got a huge history, and that would be impossible to summarize in a few short sentences. But I was just wondering, yeah, if you could start by saying a couple of things about HALC's origins and why specifically that people living with bloodborne viruses need a dedicated community legal service.
Yeah, thanks, Dion. And it's a great pleasure to be here. Yes, I've been involved with HALC since I was a wee lad. I did my training as a lawyer there, at least part of it, and I'm so proud to even be associated with the work that has gone on and continues to go on with HALC, and it's fantastic to be part of Health+Law and to partner with HALC on so many fantastic things. So it's really, really a pleasure to be here. I'll borrow a quote, I think, from the president of HALC, a long-standing president, who describes HALC as the kind of jewel in the crown of really the HIV sector in many ways, but certainly the community legal sector. And he's not wrong. HALC has a long and storied history and an active and exciting future. It is a unique, long-standing, specialist, first HIV and now bloodborne virus community legal centre. It is, we think, probably the longest, or certainly one of the longest continuing specialist services in the world in relation to these questions. HALC, as you said, was started in 1992. This is obviously a different time, an era in relation specifically to HIV, and was started by really a group of community activists, community lawyers, health sector people who, over time started to network and respond to the needs of people, the legal needs of people, particularly as they were emerging at that time. Many different issues come up when someone is affected by HIV, and the legal work has changed, of course, throughout time. And I know we'll talk about that as well. But, that's HALC's story, its history. Its future is very exciting, and I hope we talk about that too. It's been a place also, and I think it's worth saying, of active legal service provision, highly specialised, responsive legal service provision to people affected by HIV or viral hepatitis. It's been a place for the training and the support of new lawyers, many of whom have continued to work in this field or gone further afield, but have had this unique, rigorous, fantastic training provided by HALC over those many years. And it plays a really, really central role, really an outsized role in Australia's response to both HIV and viral hepatitis. It is a numerically small organisation which packs a big punch and is up there with all of our national peak organisations, community sector organisations, particularly in the jurisdictions. It is right to say it certainly is a jewel in the crown of Australia's response.
Thanks, David. I echo your sentiment that it is a real honour to be partnered with HALC. You've gestured to this already, and we'll get to this when we talk about the nitty-gritty of the work that HALC's been doing. But there have been huge changes, obviously, since the 90s, and we who swim in those waters are kind of aware of that. But more broadly, I think for the community who might be hearing things like ending HIV and, about the widespread rollout of the cure for hepatitis C and other new innovations that are signaling elimination of bloodborne viruses and, certainly huge shifts in how they manifest. Is it still necessary to have a dedicated legal service for people living with bloodborne viruses?
Without a doubt. There are many ways we can explain why it's essential. Probably the one I like to start with is there's a huge amount of demand. People affected by HIV and hepatitis-related legal matters continually and indeed increasing numbers come to HALC for the support, specialist legal advice and representation that simply they cannot access elsewhere for a variety of means. I think that is usually a really clear sign of health and a need. I think that's important. People need it, they turn up and they continue to turn up and to ask for help, support and expertise. At a policy level as well, yes, there are these signals around so-called elimination. There's an active debate about what that means and how it will work, but that doesn't take away, of course, the fact that people living with HIV or viral hepatitis are still here and will be here. And they deserve that their rights are respected, that they have access to everything else that they deserve as members of our community, and HALC is there to fight for that, to support them to do it. There, I think, two of the major reasons why I think this is still needed, essential work. The final one is just a kind of a technical legal and legal services point, which I know others will speak to today. But whilst the kind of legal matters and issues that HALC supports people with can sometimes be highly specialised and really relevant only to a bloodborne virus, even the more general issues that they support people with that many other members of the Australian community will also face become more complex and draw in HIV and viral hepatitis into them. And so it's clear that we need people with great specialism in this to make support functional and to achieve all those things I said before around people's rights as well.
Yeah, great. I mean, yeah, I know that's a tough one to answer in many ways because it's the subject of so much of our research at Health+Law at the moment. I wanted to finally ask you, just David, to set up the context of this evaluation. Why did it happen? My understanding is it was the first time the centres had an evaluation. Can you just tell us also why it's useful to do this? How does it benefit the work that HALC does?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's certainly the first kind of independent large-scale evaluation that HALC has undertaken, at least in living memory. HALC is constantly evaluating its work and improving it, of course. But there was a desire, I think, to bring together some of those lessons and some of that learning into something a little bit maybe more expansive, and indeed to have some experts who are, bring expertise, particularly in relation to the kind of impact assessment of community legal centres, just like HALC. And so, look, I'll say only briefly three things. One is this information is useful to I think reaffirm the things that we know to be true about HALC. That it is, as I said, the jewel in the crown of Australia's community legal sector, to quote our president. It helps HALC inform decision making, and again confirms some of the hunches that it may have, and gives some data and some shape to that as well. It helps, I hope, in the future in terms of law reform advocacy, indeed fundraising efforts and grant work, because we have some really fantastic evidence to say, you don't need to believe us, we know we're doing great work, but actually others have said the same thing, and that's a powerful statement to have. And I think also there's some practical benefits too around changes and additions to legal service provision and the way things run, which I know we'll speak about later as well. But again, just to start with that first one, this is a fantastic opportunity to reaffirm the things in a way that many people know. Clients, staff, former staff, people in the broader kind of health sector. And I think that is one of the major reasons to do this piece of work.
Great. Thank you so much, David. And, thank you also on a personal note for getting me involved in this, because it's meant that I've been able to work alongside my new colleague and friend, Bethany Rogers. Sorry, Beth. I just wanted to note that some of the results from the evaluation are going to be available on the Health+Law website soon. So if people tuning in today are interested in looking more closely at what was done and what was found, check in on our website or sign up to our newsletter, and you'll be alerted when that becomes available. But I want to introduce you to HALC's strategic policy lawyer, Beth Rogers, and that policy part of your job title, Beth, speaks to some of the impact that HALC tries to have beyond its client work. So in the law reform space, we'll get to that a bit later. But let's start with this sort of nitty gritty of the work that we did on this evaluation. And I'm going to ask you to kick us off by saying a bit about the aims of this research.
Hey, Dion. Thanks so much for having me and Vic on to talk about this. So to start with, the evaluation looked at assessing whether HALC achieves its own missions. Those missions are to improve the health and lives of people living with or affected by HIV and hepatitis, and also improving the systems and organisations that support these communities. To break that down a little, the evaluation team that Dion gave an outline of earlier established a set of key evaluation questions. Those questions included questions that looked into the impact that HALC services have on clients. So we asked things like, which clients are we reaching? Who aren't we reaching? We asked what impact HALC's work has on resolving client legal issues. And we also asked what impact HALC has on client wellbeing more broadly. We then had some questions which focused more broadly on the sector. We asked things like, to what extent has HALC increased the capability, efficiency, and effectiveness of health professionals, as well as health services that support people living with HIV and hepatitis? And then we posed questions about some of the work that I'm a bit more focused on, like community legal education and about law and policy. And we asked how HALC's impact and sort of manifest in those spaces. And then we had a few broader and more general questions that popped up later in the evaluation. Things like what elements of HALC's work have worked well, and where are there some opportunities for improvement in our work?
A lot of questions. I remember when we were at the start of this thing feeling a bit sort of overwhelmed. And I guess part of what you do in an evaluation, and without going into heaps of detail about the method, one of the things you do to make it manageable is reduce the scope, right? So rather than assessing all the work that the Community Legal Centre has done since it opened its doors in 1992, we chose a period of time and a sort of sector of the client. So can you tell me, Beth, a bit about some of the decisions that were made to kind of contain the scope of the evaluation?
Yeah, of course. So in terms of the period of time, we looked at the 5 financial years immediately preceding the evaluation. That definitely helped us to limit scope and save some time a bit. And then we also looked at sort of, in essence, HALC operates in different ways across different jurisdictions. So that led us to look at all of HALC services, but our depth of focus differed based on data availability and which services we provide. So in New South Wales, HALC's well established and we have core funding. And in Queensland, we've had a formal agreement since 2018, sorry, with Queensland positive people. So in the end, the evaluation focused a bit on Queensland and New South Wales services more so than in other states.
Yeah, cool. And I guess the other big question is, what type of evidence do you use? You know, there's all kinds of data sources that might be available that are kept. What was some of the things that we drew on in our case?
Yeah, so it was a mixed method approach. So we did both quantitative and qualitative. And that helped us to tell the performance story in like a few different ways. Thankfully, a lot of that evidence was based on existing data. So there's a bit of a list that you can see in the full evaluation report, but it was things like client surveys that we'd already done, service data, case studies, as well as interviews with former HALC clients that Health+Law conducted through the National Legal Needs Survey. The only new data that we ended up collecting was a survey of recent participants in our community legal education, as well as a sort of interviews/surveys that were conducted with some stakeholders in the sector.
You were a real stalwart data maven, collating and assembling and kind of preparing that material for analysis. It's no small role. Making it available to the different players, you know, and who are kind of coming in to perform analysis and then do sense making of the findings. What did you personally find most interesting about that process?
You've sort of hinted at it, but I think that that sort of, you know, the data that we have at HALC needed to be made confidential before we could send sort of, you know, use it more widely, and that redacting information to make it completely confidential takes a lot of time. So I was very lucky to have some help in that part of things. I think on a more serious note, I think it was very interesting to see that having a formal framework in place, how effective that was in limiting the scope of the evaluation, like we touched on. And also having people external to the evaluation lead it and have input in it. So Health+Law and the consultants, as well as those stakeholders and CLE participants that we interviewed. I think a lot of the recommendations that we got out of the evaluation came from these people, and as well as from cultivating change. And it was just good to have sort of an external lens that someone like Vic or myself might not have, because we're involved in the day-to-day work at HALC.
Yeah, that ability to sort of step out of the day-to-day can be really challenging when you're just so sort of immersed in it. Thank you, Beth. We'll come back to you, but I just wanted to say that your stewardship of the data that we used for this project was absolutely stellar and core to our success, I think. I'm going to turn to you now, Vic, just to talk a little bit more about HALC's work and more about the findings of this evaluation.
Thank you, Dion. Before we jump right into it, I'd like to thank David for that excellent sum up of the work that HALC does. And appreciate the kind words and the effort that goes into it, not just by the staff, but also the volunteers that give their time to contribute to the work that HALC does every day. And also to Beth for all of the amazing work that she's done on this project, which is has given us some really good data and recommendations to work on in the future.
Thank you.
So yeah, I think reflecting on impacts is really hard, and you know, there's a lot that came out of this this evaluation. I thought it might be useful to start with some really material nuts and bolts kind of things, services and reach. So my first question is just, can you talk a little bit about who and where HALC's clients are and the types of legal problems they tend to present with?
Yeah, of course. So HALC assists on average about 650 clients every year. The bulk of these clients are based in New South Wales, which isn't surprising, as New South Wales does have the highest number of people living with HIV in Australia compared to the other states and territories. Outside of New South Wales, the largest number of clients that we provide representation services to is based in Queensland, with the next highest number being in Victoria. Our clients largely represent people with HIV and viral hepatitis, and hepatitis B as well. And so within that, the large number, the large percentage is of people with HIV. We also provide representation services to some at-risk communities or key populations, as we like to call them, which include people from the LGBTIQA plus community, migrants, including asylum seekers, people with disability, and people who experience domestic violence and homelessness. In terms of problem types, I'll go back to what David was talking about as to the need for HALC service in this environment where we've got U is equal to U and ending HIV and a cure for hepatitis C. I think one thing it's important to bring up is that the latest research on stigma against people with blood-borne viruses shows that despite all of the advancements in treatment for these conditions, that the stigma is pervasive and it hasn't decreased despite all of the efforts that have gone into it for the last many years. And so that brings me into HALC's work, which I like to describe it falls into three major categories. The first of which is discrimination. So, and the bulk of the work in discrimination is work in areas where there's legalized discrimination. So in immigration policy and in insurance, both those areas have exemptions under the Disability Discrimination Act, which means that discrimination can be lawful. And so a bulk of our cases then fall under immigration or insurance discrimination. The next, I guess, category is the unlawful discrimination. Now, that type of discrimination happens every day, but it's rare. It's rarer, rather, and it's rarer because of privacy protections and people becoming aware of their rights about disclosure. And so having that knowledge and then choosing who to disclose and not to disclose protects them largely from that discrimination. But we see every day where disclosure does occur, discrimination always follows. And so it's in accessing health services, accessing housing, in employment settings. So it really is pervasive across all areas. And so that constitutes our major, I guess, category of cases we assist with. The other categories I'd like to mention are, I guess, a lot of people with HIV and blood-borne viruses tend to belong to marginalized communities. And so the problems that they face seem to be similar to those faced by other marginalized communities. So problems with police, problems with housing, tenancy, family violence, not that that's exclusive to those communities, but it is prevalent. And so that's sort of the second category. And the final category are some of the more traditional problems that used to come even 30 years ago with HIV, which is wills and enduring guardianships and again disclosure and privacy issues. So that's probably the bulk of the work that we do.
Yeah, and I think just listening to you walk through that, it's a good reminder to really emphasize that while HALC is a service for people living with blood-borne viruses, and for HIV and hepatitis-related legal issues, people in these communities also experience the gamut of legal issues, many of which may not make it to a lawyer or a legal professional, but when they do, it's often because they are more complicated for them, or they are exacerbated in some ways by their blood-borne virus status. I was just wondering if you could reflect a little bit. One of the things that we flagged, or we've highlighted already, and that was looked at a little bit in the evaluation we did is the expansion of HALC into from New South Wales into Queensland. Can you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to ask you to reflect on that. You know, that was a little bit of a different setup. Could you say how you think that sort of went in relation to how it's traditional operating, and what it might say about, I guess, legal need among people with bloodborne viruses in other parts of Australia?
Yeah. Absolutely. So HALC has always provided some services across the country, including in Queensland. So we've had a handful of clients from each state that we provide representation services to, and we've always provided advice to anyone with a bloodborne virus that contacts us, or at least attempt to provide advice if we can't refer them. So this partnership with QPP developed as part of that relationship that's been built with QPP over many years, not just in referrals and providing client services, but also in the advocacy work that we do, and lower form activities in that area. So we've often appeared before Queensland bodies advocating for lower form to the benefit of people with HIV and viral hepatitis. So that's how it sort of commenced. And there was then at that point identified that there's some need for QPP clients or for legal services, as a few QPP clients were already being represented by HALC where we were able to represent them. And so when this agreement came into place, we really saw how much need, in fact, there was in Queensland when that service became available. So, just by way of an example, I think between the first and second year of that partnership to the third and fourth year, the demand for services in Queensland more than doubled. And so that was an interesting, I guess, statistic that came out of this evaluation and review, and what we found is where people were aware that a service existed, they would come and seek out a service, and so if by that, so if we look at the legal services we provide in New South Wales, I think we provide services to about 4.5% of people with HIV in New South Wales. And in Queensland, it's half of that. And in other states, it's half of that. So if we sort of make a conflation with other states and say we want to serve 4.5% of people with HIV in Queensland or in other states, we can see how much that demand will be. And it's, it's quite significant.
Mm. I mean, I just wanted to also point out, it was implicit in what you said, but one of the things that reflection on that part of HALC's story shows is that how important the partnerships are with other community-based organisations. And in the case of Queensland, it was Queensland Positive People, the sort of peak state HIV organisation. I wanted to ask you though, if apart from thinking geographically, are there other ways in which the demographics of HALC's clients are sort of shifting? Are there, have there been changes over time? Did anything come out of the evaluation that sort of pricked your interest in terms of shifts among who the clients are?
Yeah, so there's we've got quite a wide range of statistics from that have been gathered from the evaluation. So the percentage of new clients that HALC has is at its highest. I think there's during the period, it was 45% of clients that we had were receiving their first service at HALC. So that shows that reach has really been increasing. There's also something like 65% of our clients were born overseas, and we saw that over that 5-year period of the study. There's been an increase in the proportion of clients experiencing or being at risk of family violence or homelessness.
Mm.
There's also an overrepresentation on women, or of women rather, because the compared to the services we provide to men, which represent a much higher proportion of people with HIV. And when you compare that to the general population, there's more women who need health services or have been accessing health services than the general population. And there's also a lot of clients with intersectional vulnerabilities, mental illness. There's obviously, I mentioned family violence already, and homelessness. And our average clients seem to be younger than the national average of people living with HIV. So I believe, I think 60 to 68% of our clients were aged between 25 to 49. And so that's been a bit of a change because that that sort of cohort, that age group, is only about 54% when you look at people with HIV overall.
I'm going to save the question about who is not being served until the end. I think that might be a good place to talk about it when we get to the recommendations. But because I want to get to impact really, which is the core of the evaluation, but also a really hard thing to measure. It's, you know, highly contested sort of concept. How do you measure impact? As Beth gestured, you know, there's lots of evidence sources that a community legal source collects, like client surveys, you know, all of which can show the impact that people self-report, that, you know, that they say, you know, about how the service changed their life or enabled them to have better access to healthcare, or, you know, so many other things. And we have heard really rich stories about HALC's impact in the interviews that we've conducted with people living with HIV and hepatitis B across Australia. But I'm interested, yeah, for you, some of the things that jumped out. And, you know, again, there's so much, and I would really refer people to the evaluation itself when it's up online. But I guess for someone so immersed in the details of doing this work every day, you know, stepping out of that and reading this evaluation, what were some of the impact related things that really stood out for you?
I think for me, some of the impact that we notice when we're in it, we sort of forget about it because we get the impact, we get an outcome, and then we're on to the next, you know. And so we don't see the overall impact of that at a scale that was sort of assessed during this this evaluation. You know, we just, even outside the evaluation, we tend to collect our wins for the week, and every week in our casework meeting, which, you know, we report to our management committee, and we use for our funders, and that's one way that we've kept track of our wins prior to the evaluation. And we don't sort of go back often and think of what that meant for the client in particular, you know. So, you know, I mentioned a lot of our client base is in immigration and more overseas. Now, if you can only sort of imagine the benefits to them, because they're so apparent, which is that they might not be returned to a country where they don't have access to the medical care that they need here, you know, which is life-saving. They might be at risk of harm due to their BBV status or their sexuality or gender identity. They might not be separated from their family members once their visa is granted. So we see those sort of immediate benefits. But we don't think about, I guess, what that means for a lot of people in the long run. I mean, there's a story that comes to my mind, which was one of the first clients that was handed over to me when I started at HALC as a full-time lawyer, and that it was a person with HIV from one of the Asian countries. Most of his family were permanent residents in Australia, and he just did not have any pathway because of his HIV status. He was prohibited from most of the visa pathways that would be available to other people. And he, the thing that stood out to me was he used to tell me that his dream was to become a bus driver in Australia. That was his, I guess, passion. And one day I ran into him while I was getting on the bus, and he was the driver, and he remembered me, and then he emailed me after seeing me to thank me for for getting him there, because he wouldn't have gotten there. So that's just a simple, sweet story that I always remember. But going back to some of the outcomes we've assessed as part of the evaluation, there's the sheer success rate in terms of the clients that we represent. So there was a statistic about our success in visa applications. I think it was 87% success in partner visas, and it says 50% success rate in protection visas. But most of those would have been appealed, and since the new the Administrative Review Tribunal has come into place, I think we've had up to 15 wins since October, where those matters that would have been refused at the first instance of immigration have now been remitted back as a success. So the sheer success that we see in the cases that we represent clients in became quite apparent from the evaluation. Now, there was also sort of the amount of services which helped clients get better health outcomes. So getting them access to Medicare, referring them to services of partner organizations to get other support that they might need, and just basically improving their livelihoods in specific ways. And that was reflected in some of the surveys. So I think 97% of our clients said, 90% of the clients believed that their well-being and stress improved because of HALC. They said a large percentage said that their personal and cultural needs were met. There was some about 18% that said that HALC support prevented negative consequences for them, that their mental well-being would have been harmed if it wasn't for HALC. And there's a whole bunch of quotes that people will read in the report, which are quite heartwarming. So there's, it's good to reflect back and see that impact that we've made over the years.
Yeah, and look, there's, it's in the research world, we have this conflict sometimes around statistics and the qualitative, people's stories and how you kind of measure them together, and it's a sort of balance. But I think when you see numbers like, like that level of wins alongside people's testimonies of, you wonder really like what happens to people who aren't able to engage in the service, and just how distinctly different their experience of the same legal issues, say it's migration or whatever, without the dedicated legal support. I want to bring Beth back in here because one of the things that I learnt about community legal services is that they do this thing called community legal education, which I didn't know about. So Beth, can you just tell me or tell us briefly what that is and what it specifically looks like in HALC's case?
Yes, of course. So I think my fault in that might have been just going around using the acronym CLE, but that refers to community legal education. And so essentially they can either be activities or resources, say like a guide. And those activities or resources are directed at improving legal knowledge or understanding of both the legal system and legal assistance services. So for HALC, these sessions are either directed at professionals working in the sector, or they can be also delivered to the community of people living with HIV and hepatitis themselves. The main topics that we covered in our CLEs over the evaluation period were firstly a general CLE on HIV and the law. So this would sort of be a high-level overview of key legal issues, as well as often a bit of an overview of HALC services and referral pathways. And the second main topic was migration. The group of professionals that we were able to get a survey of from community and health providers who did CLE sessions during the period, it was a small sample, but 80% of those attendees responded to the survey and said that their learnings from the session would change their practice. So that might be like referring someone or being able to identify a legal need in a client of theirs. And then just to plug it a little bit further, the sample gave a rating of 4.7 out of 5 for usefulness for our CLE sessions.
Yeah, and look, I guess to join the dots and reflect on this from a sort of civilian perspective, a lot of those professionals, like in the sector, we're talking about people who are often the first point of contact for individuals living with bloodborne viruses, and people who might think, oh, there's a legal issue, but I have no confidence or sense of what to do next and where to refer that person or what advice to give them to, so that they could potentially grapple with that. So it's a really, really important role. Another huge part of the work you do is around law reform and legal advocacy. And I recognize that this is something that, happens over time. That's something that a lot of people contribute to as well, alongside HALC, it's your partner organizations. And I was just, hoping that you could sort of just say a few things about how HALC is currently providing advocacy for people living with HIV and hepatitis, and what was sort of highlighted about that work in the evaluation.
Yeah, of course. So as you say, a lot of it ends up being intangible, like gradual changes over time. And it's also a collaborative process. So in a way, it's hard to pinpoint what HALC's difference is. The work we do in law reform and advocacy, it focuses on all of those legal issues we talked about before, typically areas contributing to criminalization, discrimination, and stigma. So it's things like mandatory disease testing, migration law reform, and criminal laws that influence the lawfulness of behavior in sexual relations or relationships more accurately. And so the one thing we were able to have a go at quantifying in the evaluation was the submissions that were done over the period to different inquiries. Often those submissions were done in collaboration with other organizations. So there was organizations like ACON, QPP that Vic had mentioned before, NAPWA, and a whole range of other peak HIV organizations. So in the 5-year period, there were 80 recommendations made in submissions that HALC had either done on our own or jointly. And we found that 32% of those recommendations were either met or reflected in final reports or bills. So just one quick example is our submission in 2022 to the Equality Bill was referenced 5 times in the committee's final report, and then some of those recommendations were passed in the Equality Bill that New South Wales passed in a limited version last year.
Yeah, and this stuff is ongoing, and one or at least more of the pieces of legislation you mentioned then is again come up recently in a ombudsman's report. So, I think an important thing to say is these are sort of long haul projects. I wanted to end this conversation by talking about the recommendations that came out of this evaluation. I think recommendations can be tricky, and in some ways, sometimes they're things that you expect to hear. Sometimes they're surprising. They certainly provide a clue about what the future might look like for an organisation like HALC. So to give you the word on this, Vic, one of the recommendations that came up was to expand HALC services to other jurisdictions beyond New South Wales and Queensland. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's been our goal and I guess aim for a long time, because we know that clients who come to us from other states are needing our assistance, and those that we have to turn away sometimes because of and quite often because of capacity issues. So that's probably one of our biggest, one of 2 large goals, and so it's not surprising that came out of that report. There's so many stories of people who contact us, and they're so vulnerable and they really, really need our help. And where we do have capacity, we try to take on matters, even though we're at capacity quite often. So yeah, I mean, that one wasn't too surprising. Obviously, funding remains our biggest constraint. Because we're based in New South Wales, it's difficult for us to get other states to fund an organization that's in New South Wales, QPP being an exception. We have reached out to other organizations. They're restricted by their funding agreements and their funders. So it's an issue where I guess well, we're quite in tune with, but it's definitely a goal. And we're working with various partner organizations, applying for further funding through various streams to be able to expand and provide services to other states and territories.
Were there other recommendations from the evaluation that you wanted to mention?
Yes, well, there was, so I mentioned two large ones. The second one would be to be able to provide more services to people with hepatitis across the country. There's the number of people living with hepatitis in Australia compared to people with HIV far exceeds that number. So, there's clear unmet legal needs there. We are aware of some of what those needs are, but because we haven't really gone into those communities and haven't had those communities walking through the door as much because of, again, capacity, we're still yet to get to the bottom of what legal issues affect people with hepatitis and how we can assist with that. So that's the other space that we really want to expand in, and not just provide legal services, but also community legal education. I think one of the findings of the survey that David and you've been sort of working on is mentioned that there's sort of not as much legal literacy about the issues within the hepatitis community compared to the HIV community. So that's a space that we really want to get into. Some of the other sort of smaller recommendations are also quite important. So, instead of having this sort of evaluation that goes across 5 years, having continually, evaluating our work and having a bit more structure to it to see how we can improve and gather more data. That's one evaluation that came out. There's also trying to understand client experiences and from between different cohorts of clients and how we performed during providing those services. And also to develop content which we can then use to provide that legal education and have it be more consistent and ongoing as opposed to ad hoc and responsive to people requesting that education. So, some great recommendations there, and we're going to be looking to take all of those on board.
Yeah, and that last one links back to what Beth's reflection on how powerful practitioners who had been part of community legal education with HALC found that, how much that they said it really sort of satisfied a need. Of course, I would be remiss not to say we heartily agree with you at Health+ Law about the legal needs of people living with hepatitis B. That's an explored area, and hopefully some of the results of our work, so just plugging that, will help support HALC's goals to move more into that area, to understand that legal need better, to understand why those clients haven't presented as much historically, and how to target them better. I think
one thing I would like to mention
Yeah.
is that I guess perhaps because of the reporting, the period of the evaluation, one thing that sort of didn't make the list of things we do is in terms of that advocacy component is strategic litigation, which is my personal favorite thing, where we actually exercise change in the law or policy through litigation. So many years ago, healthcare workers who wished to perform exposure-prone procedures could not do so because the health policy didn't allow them to. And that was out of step with some of the other jurisdictions which reflected the science on HIV transmission, where they'd accepted that treatment as prevention and U is equal to U information way before us. And so that policy came through as part of litigation that we initiated. That's an important part of the work that we do and is quite personal to me to take on government departments and larger organizations to exercise that change. Another example would be the case that we took to the High Court on the issue of criminal intent, Zabaroni v. the Queen, many years ago, which clarified the meaning of intention in criminal law. So yeah, I mean, we're always looking out for more opportunities to do advocacy through that aspect as well, and Beth's going to be a big part of that in her role.
A lot to look forward to, Beth. I mean, those strategic litigation stories are kind of amazing, and I feel like maybe there's more evaluation work that has to be done to tell those stories, particularly if they were left out.
Or they just didn't fall within the time period. That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's always more work to do. I do think that's a great place to finish. And I want to end by just acknowledging or reminding anyone that's listening in that there's so much more detail to this evaluation that helps to tell HALC's story and the story of the work that it does, and the story, most importantly, of the clients and how the work impacts them in their lives. And that's going to pop up on either Health+Law or HALC's website, or both. If you want to stay up to date with that, sign up to our newsletter, which is on the Health+Law website. Just some very quick thank yous to everyone who was involved in this work, including the HALC Committee of Management, who came in at very key moments to help make sense of the findings. To David and our team at the Health+Law HQ, to our evaluators at Cultivating Change, especially Taimur Siddiqui and Emma Thomas, who designed and kind of oversaw and guided our analysis and sense making and final reporting. And huge thanks to the staff and volunteers at HALC, past and present, but especially Beth, who really was pivotal in gathering and analyzing all this data. So big thank you to all of you, David, Beth, Vic, for getting together to unpack some of that as part of the Health+Law webinar series. A big thanks to Cara Bruce for supporting this conversation today and getting us organised. And thank you to everyone who's been tuning in. We'll see you again next time.
Thank you.